So, I mean, coming from the ranks of that, I know you didn't stay in to, achieve '05, '06, et cetera, but you've been around it far more than I have, or, any or most enlisted guys have. If Trump waved a fucking wand tomorrow and said, "Hey, guy with two last names, I want you to fix the military from a leadership standpoint," do you even know how you would go about it?
I don't know if I know today how I'd go about it, but I'm confident that I could. Yeah. Maybe it's my hubris coming back. Who knows, right? Maybe my ego coming back. But I think it just boils down to the basics, right? And it's the basics that you're taught as a junior officer going through BUDS, like even more so than OCS. Yeah. And I think that it's, really looking out for your people, making sure that you're clearly communicating the objective, making sure that they're properly trained, properly equipped, and if they're called upon to get the job done, that you're going to bring everybody home, or at least that the sacrifice is going to be worth like that not happening. And we ended up just, as they say, we didn't fight a 20-year war. We fought, a 1-year war 20 different times. Yeah. And I think it's just difficult for me to, to sit with. And I'd hope that we don't make the same mistakes again. I think we will, because I think we made them in Korea. I think we made them in Vietnam. I think we made them, effectively in every conflict, maybe with the exception of the Persian Gulf in the 90s. I think we make those same mistakes. And I don't necessarily, and I've gotten to know some of these very senior generals and admirals that I admire and I think are fantastic people and I think are brilliant. I actually don't, I think just the system is architected in a weird way where politics and, our civilians intersect with what the generals want to do in a weird way to a point where the lines sort of like blur. And I think that we end up just sort of like in a worse of both worlds versus a best of both worlds dynamic. So I think it's sort of like a structural challenge that we have. And also, like, it was very popular from all Americans to go into Afghanistan post 9/11. And then very deeply unpopular to go into Iraq. And I was on the side of going in at the time. I was young. Now I feel like that was, short-sighted and obviously the wrong call. Like the whole premise of which we went in was
flawed, I think.
It was completely inaccurate.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, I've had this conversation with quite a few vets from that conflict, and I would say in pretty much every case, we agree is that. Yeah.
So it's a weird thing. I imagine, like, for you too. I mean, or all of us. I think it's common. We want to be war fighters. We want to be like that is something deeply ingrained in who we are and what we were trained to do. But it's weird to even talk about anything as being a success operationally on any of these deployments. It's weird for me to listen to, like, your guests and in other podcasts too, hear about like the successes that we've had tactically, but then come to terms with strategically it was a failure.
Yeah.
And so it's like hard to hold these like 2 or 3 things at once. Life's complicated. Like this is one thing I've learned in life is like I used to be so black and white, and I still sort of am, but life is a shade of gray.
Yeah.
And 2 things, 3 things, even 4 things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to like identify a clear conclusion from.
Yeah, 100%. After that platoon, you ended up support activity 1, cross-functional team Alpha, and then did your officer in charge in the Philippines.
Correct.
Is that right? Anything you want to share from doing the cross-functional team?
I think it's part of how I am where I am now, to be honest. Like, so for those that don't know, like the CFT at the time, which is now CRT, I believe, was basically the Organic Intelligence Fusion, command attached to the SEAL team. I think it started during the Iraq War because we realized we needed sort of like our own sort of like intelligence fusion capability for targeting purposes for the guys on the pointy end. And so that's what I was in charge of, is like a number of different intelligence analysts, humanters, siginters, all source, all that kind of stuff. in terms of assisting with sort of like our targeting, for us and, to a certain extent for other special operations forces and, working with sort of our partner nations. And so went to the Philippines at the time. Was not really where anybody wanted to go. I think you did a PACOM deployment too, and like it's not where like people wanted to go when they could go to the Middle East and sort of like do real team guy stuff. But I was surprised with the number of incidents that we're having down there with Abu Sayyaf and MNLF.
Well, the MILF, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, which I don't think they saw that coming.
Yeah, I mean, dude, like I was like shocked. Like we went there and like everyone was like, oh, it's gonna be pretty quiet. And we had some guys come out of that with combat action ribbons and a couple like low order like IEDs that went off like underneath the CO's truck. And it's just like, thank God that was low order and just sort of like went, and it's just like, fortunately. So it was surprising to me that was sort of the issue. And we were, I think, a rotation after, maybe 2 rotations after the Battle of Zamboanga at the time. So we were down there in Zambo, and that whole city just got fucking decimated essentially by these, Islamic extremists down there in that area. So it's not a great area to go. But I think there, by working with the intelligence fusion team is where I got to see some of the more high horsepower technology that was underwriting our technology efforts. And we were early adopters. We were told we were one of the first 20 customers of Palantir. I'm not sure how true that is because you never really know, but we were early nevertheless. And to see some of the things on the TS side and to see how that intersected with what Palantir was doing, I just became hooked on the technology bug, so to speak, of how that was going to impact our missions, our operations moving forward. And I just, became pretty obsessed about breaking into that industry to figure out what the future of intelligence, the future of warfighting looked like from a technology standpoint.
Can you Reader's Digest synopsize Palantir?
Yeah. Well, I know they have a lot of different products, but the way we were explained it is they ingest data from a lot of different places, and at the time, it wasn't rudimentary machine learning. By today's standards, it's rudimentary, but they applied machine learning to all these disparate data sources to highlight various threats or opportunities for us to conduct operations from a targeting standpoint. And so it's something that, as you can imagine, it's probably common to the enterprise right now. We have data siloed in a whole lot of different places, no real non-manual way to synthesize that information to draw out, actionable insights. From a Navy SEAL standpoint, the actionable insights that you want are where are the bad guys, what are they saying, who do they know, and it helps you architect a targeting plan for the good guys to go and get them. So that was my experience with it then. Now I know they do a lot more because it's been 10, 15 years, and they're one of the most successful public companies out there right now.
It almost reminds me or makes me think of, it's like the Entity 1.0 from Mission Impossible. Have you seen the new?
I haven't seen it yet. I want to. I'm going to take my wife on a date night to go see it.
Yeah. Have you seen part 1?
Yeah.
I mean,
I've seen all the other Mission Impossibles except for the most recent one.
Yeah. I mean, so the part 1, obviously explains kind of how it works, but I'm curious, as somebody in that space, is that something that you grapple with at all, whether you want to call it sentient or not, a rogue or element of artificial intelligence and algorithmic targeting and intelligence gathering capabilities that somehow manage to go rogue, if you will, and become a problem for the human species?
Yeah, I think at this point it's sort of like a philosophical question to me versus a real one. I don't know what your experience is using Apple Siri or things like that, but that motherfucker never knows what I'm saying and can never do what I want it to do. And
I don't use it.
It's just like, hey Siri, what's the weather today? Dude, it's like maybe I mumble, maybe I don't speak like a man. I don't know what it is, but like it's always wrong. And so I think we're pretty far out from that. I think the best I can do is like point to the people that help to educate me in the technology space, that are much smarter than me in this space, and I've had the opportunity to learn from many of those folks. Obviously, I track what folks like Elon are saying and all that stuff. And so I think that throughout the history of technology, there's always been a fear of that technology, whether it be the automobile, the telephone, the bicycle. Like, all of this there's always been a fear and a pushback, and what I think, at least up till present day, is it's always led to an increase in standard of living. It's always, raised our GDP. It's always made us more productive as sort of a species and as mankind. It has brought us out of poverty. This is the most prosperous time, in the history of humanity in many ways, enabled by medicine and by technology. And so I think if history is any judge, that's probably the most likely outcome of what's happening here.
Yeah.
But as with anything that's positive, there can be negatives as well.
Yeah.
I think most people would argue that the internet is a good thing. A lot more people connected and doing business and all that stuff, but there is nefarious use of it as well. And so there is, I think, probably this like Pareto principle of 80-20 positive that comes from a new technology, but with 20% in terms of hacking, vulnerabilities, and just criminal activity and bad shit that can occur as well. I think that's probably what's going to play out in the AI space as well. I think there's reasons to be optimistic, but there's also reasons to be, careful and cautious and borderline scared in terms of AI cyber attacks and things like that, and the deep fakes that are going on, the voice cloning. People listening to this could just clone our voice like instantaneously. They don't even need the full episode and engage in a crime with that information. Yeah. And so there's things like that we're going to need, a technology-enabled defense against to counter what the bad guys are doing from an offense standpoint.
Yeah.
And so it's a weird dynamic too, because I also want our guys to have the best. This is another thing in the industry. You probably have this too. Is we are told in the military that we have the best gadgets and gizmos and kit. Like, that's the best thing that's out there for sure. That's what we're told. But oftentimes it's actually yesterday's technology tomorrow. Like our radios that we're using and many things that we were using are just clearly not cutting edge compared to consumer electronics. Yeah. And so I think that was a frustration for me in the service. And I think that probably a lot of these digital natives right now, these Gen Zers are going through, they're digital native gamers. And what they use, at home for entertainment is oftentimes not as cutting edge as what they get issued as far as special operations kit.
Yeah. I think where to me it seems like a difference, and maybe it's just because of the bias of being present, in current time. But, if you contrast AI and, computer-generated fill in the blank, compared to the bicycle, the telephone, the television, what have you, I think what seems like the stark contrast and difference is the immediacy of the exchange of information, the immediacy of relaying information to other human beings globally, coupled with the augmentation of reality to a point with which it's becoming impossible to know the difference.
Right.
To me, that's the scariest part about it. And I think, the Terminator 2 scenario, I agree. I think, is not likely. If it is, it's probably a long way off, enough to not be overly concerned. I mean, I would hate to kick ourselves 30 years from now and say if we had been more concerned and took it more seriously, it wouldn't have happened, should it happen. But I think right now where I struggle with kind of the morality of the decision-making process specifically boils down to the targeting aspect, which is, say, drones.
Yep.
Obviously, there's so many AI-based algorithms that can target far better than a group of human beings, faster, more accurately, et cetera. But I'm curious to get your take as somebody who's in the space is, do you draw a line where the targeting from start to finish is done by somebody who's not, or done by an entity that's not human?
I think you have to. I think ultimately it needs to be human on the loop in some capacity. But we already have is it a failure? Like when we say it's a failure of intelligence, like a failure of intelligence in terms of at the end of the day, it's a human who makes the decision to go into Iraq. Like it was a human who made the decision, due to a failure of intelligence to do a variety of strikes, to include in the Afghan withdrawal. I think we struck somebody and it was reported that this was the people that were behind the Abbey Gate, explosions and all that stuff. And it turns out it wasn't. It was innocent people. And that's people at the end of the day that made that decision based on information that they collected in a breakdown and the flaws, and it was wrong, right? It was wrong information. And so I don't think that we can get to a point where we blindly trust, the machine or artificial intelligence with life and death consequences like that. But at the same time, what's really interesting to consider is what if the enemy is?
Right.
And what if their OODA loop is orders of magnitude more effective than yours, whether that be in aerial dogfighting or other situations? What do you then do? And so I think that we probably pretty quickly, like it or not, and there's great reasons not to that you brought up in terms of the morality of it. It's sort of like nuclear proliferation, and like, that led to the Cold War. Is like, well, do we not want to have nuclear weapons when the Soviets have a lot of them? Well, there's a lot of morality that goes in line with using those. Probably the most immoral weapon to use, given the mass casualties they'll create against innocent people. So I think that's probably what's going to play out here. Is like we can't afford as a country to not embrace this, because as unsatisfying as it is to say, China and others will. Yeah. And so do we want to be the ones that don't have it, or are we in the midst of an AI arms race?
Yeah.
I think we're in the midst of an AI arms race.
Yeah.
And I think that intersecting AI and training AI with our values is imperative, because we can't lose that. And if we embolden a machine or a set of algorithms to act like the Chinese, then I think we sort of lose who we are. And so I think that's going to be a really challenging thing. Obviously, lots of debate in terms of the regulation of AI, how much we want to invest in it, how much we want to utilize it and where do we draw that line. I think there's probably consensus broadly that line is, in terms of making the decision. But I think pretty clearly, you look at any of the AI foundation models, OpenAI, Anthropic, and everybody else that's out there. It's remarkable what it can do instantaneously that a person, a whole team of people, couldn't do in weeks, and it can do in minutes. Yeah. And so when you consider that sort of technology horsepower, it is pretty prolific.
It's a sobering reality to hear you say that, but I don't disagree. Is that would you rather get left behind or engage in something that maybe
it's unsatisfying? It's one of these areas. It's not like black and white. There's a shade of gray, right? It's sort of like we were saying earlier. It's like what do you do? So even if we do disagree, I guess as Americans in terms of the use of it. There's some game theory there in terms of what about our adversaries, and so is our hand forced? And I think it sort of is. Yeah. At least I don't know another way around it.
Yeah, it's a pick your poison for sure. A hypothetical I would throw at you, and maybe it doesn't even matter at this point with what you just said. But I imagine kind of tactically right now. Imagine a scenario where you've got a drone that is, doing an ISR, eyes in the sky kind of thing, supporting a platoon on the ground that's going in to assault a target, and an ambush is being set up. The drone recognizes it, and if it doesn't act on its own without us saying, "Oh, that's an then it's too late," and so we authorize that drone to strike human targets without any human interface or authorization whatsoever. To me, that's a pretty realistic scenario currently.
I think it is, and the way I've so I guess for some context, so I mean, I started a venture capital fund after my time in service, moved up to Silicon Valley, worked at a couple of the bigger venture capital firms. First, Andreessen Horowitz, and then Lightspeed Venture Partners, two of the big multi-billion-dollar investment firms in Silicon Valley that invest in cutting-edge technology. So pretty much any of the household name technology companies that are out there that people have heard about, Silicon Valley, has invested in those and gotten those started, whether it be Facebook, NVIDIA, OpenAI, all of these companies, SpaceX, they're all venture capital-backed companies. Arguably, the most important companies of our time got their start by raising money from people called venture capitalists. And so I worked at a couple of those firms. And I was fortunate to have the opportunity, I guess for the third time in my life, career-wise, to be mentored not only by Olympic coaches and by decorated Silver Star recipients in the teams, but now sort of like whatever the equivalent of that is in venture capital, the people that have been in the technology industry and investing in these things and starting these things for decades. So I got to learn what they look for and the technology shifts that occur over time and the platform shifts, as we call them. And ultimately, why I decided to start our own firm called Harpoon is because I thought that we were going too far against our roots of how Silicon Valley started. Silicon Valley started, like in its origins, effectively during the Cold War to develop new technology for Uncle Sam to win the Cold War. And that's where it got its name, like, and all the silicon and all the hardware that came out of that space. We got spoiled as an industry through the dot-com boom and bust and cloud, apps, mobile, so on and so forth. And those ecosystems drew pretty far apart. And I thought there was a place to make those ecosystems draw, closer back together. And so started Harpoon with a mission orientation to invest in technologies that we thought were impactful from a national security and prosperity standpoint to the United States, things that could intersect with national level priorities. And we call them the freedom stack, which is AI, cybersecurity and IT. We have energy. We have bio, health, and security. Like all of these things are really important, I think, to the national interest. I think most people would agree, especially in DC, that these are technologies important to the national interest. What sort of happened since starting this is a couple things. Great power competition. China has become a looming threat on the horizon for us that has embraced, through state-sponsored technology development, all of these critical technology areas where we've done it sort of from a free market standpoint. It's only very recently that Uncle Sam has gotten behind those trends in a meaningful way. But what's also happened is the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where for the first time ever, I think we've seen drone war 1. I think that's what this is going to go down in history as, is drone war 1, where we've seen a smaller, outnumbered, less financially backed, less equipped force operate almost like the insurgents that we fought against, which is Ukraine, and find a way to outmaneuver and render obsolete the sophisticated large-scale weapon systems and the people that Russia has. And so now they're producing millions of small drones a year that have strategic level impact on the battlefield. And so I have a decent level of proximity to this because I know some people that have been there. And we started a company. It was the first time we've ever done this outside of our venture fund to help address this problem and operate at the nexus of this problem. We believe that the world has changed forever by virtue of that, where we're at a unique point in time where geopolitics is intersecting with technology more than we ever would have thought, and it's happening at the tactical edge, where large-scale attritable, meaning sort of like affordable throwaway systems, effectively hobbyist drones, are reshaping TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures on the battlefield. And ultimately, that's going to transform doctrine for the first time since the introduction of the machine gun. It's going to be that big. And I don't think people realize that yet broadly, to include in the United States military. So we helped start a company called Vector, which operates at that intersection broadly. We want to be the subject matter experts in all things technology-enabled warfare, which includes training, which includes TTPs, doctrine, as well as products to service that demand, both offensive and defensive, to help protect our guys to be more capable on the battlefield. So a lot of the things that we're talking about here, I think are, my opinions are informed from working with these guys who do have firsthand experience living in that threat environment, offensively and defensively, in terms of where the future of war is going. And a big reason why we decided to start the company is, from everybody I talk to, nobody has an answer of what we do. How do we do infill in a contested environment like this? It's like flying IEDs effectively with 20 kilometer plus ranges where you can't jam them like we could up mini IEDs, because just like they had command wire IEDs then, we've got command wire fiber optics that go 20 kilometers on the bottom of these drones. So you can't so it's just like the same thing done differently in a more dispersed and disaggregated threat environment. And so it is a concern of mine about the enemy, getting the lead on us, China or any other non-state actor getting a lead on us on this technology area, and us as a military force broadly not being able to maneuver on the battlefield we're too accustomed to technology superiority in terms of our strategic level assets, the F-35 and all of our, our carrier strike groups, our satellite systems. We're at a point now where these things are becoming so diffuse that the battlefield is being fundamentally reshaped. And this is something that we need to figure out. And we think a company should help our government and our warfighters figure that out. Yeah. Very similar to how you're helping with the dog program, like helping our military, at least historically, helping them figure out how to have the best working dogs. It's not something that there's a lot of domain expertise on. And now on the technology front, there's not a lot of domain expertise because it's just so new.
Yeah.